Yeah, you're good. Hi, everybody. We're here in Montreal at Concordia University, and I want to start right away by thanking a couple of folks who've helped us manage being here, and that's Deanna Fong. Hey, Zach, I'm talking about Deanna over here, Deanna Fong, who's here. Oh, sorry, Deanna. Sorry, she didn't want to be on the air. There she is. And next to her, Jason Camlott, who's connected to us in a number of ways, but and I'll tell you more about that in a little bit. But for now, suffice to know that Jason and Deanna have helped us get here. And let me introduce some other people, and then we're going to get started. First of all, to my far right, we have Anna. Hello, Anna. Came from Philly, part of the ModPo team. Are we having fun in Canada so far?
Yes.
Say one thing that we did so far.
Well, we've already made 5 new videos, so.
Five new videos. So we're setting up in week 10 of ModPo Plus a contemporary Canadian poetry sampler, a little anthology.
Yeah.
But some of the videos that we're doing will be going into earlier parts of the syllabus, and some will be duplicated in that little Canadian section of week 10. Anyway, hi, Anna.
Hey.
And next to Anna is the eminent poet, Erin Moray. Well, you bridled at my saying eminent poet. It's true. You're a legend. Everybody, we talk to all the Canadian poets. They say, you're gonna be seeing Erin. She's so great. Anyway,
you're so nice.
Thank you, Erin, for hanging out with us. And
it's a pleasure. It's nice.
This is great. And we're gonna be hanging around with Erin on Saturday again. We're gonna be recording a new episode of Poem Talk, along with Karis Shearer, who's sitting to my left, who came all the way from Kelowna, which is an hour east of Vancouver, which is still a long fucking way.
It's a long way. You have to go to Vancouver first to go back.
You have to go an hour west to come, east, I don't know, 8 hours, 7 hours east. How many, if you drove it, have you ever driven it?
I've never driven it.
Ever?
Ever.
Okay.
But I can tell you that I flew all night to get here.
Oh,
So
anyway.
power naps.
So snaps for
Very
Karis
excited to be
Shearer, who
here.
came the furthest to be here. There's some, actually, you know what? Magdalena is from Poland. I think she came
Yeah,
further.
you deserve.
That's so crazy.
I think Sao Paulo is further
And
than
Sao
Kelowna.
Paulo, oh my goodness, oh wow.
That's very
All
far.
right, so,
How,
oh my
that's
goodness.
How many hours in a plane? Is like 9?
9 to New York plus 1 hour to
Yeah.
So that was Augusto, who's from Brazil, who happens to be here in Montreal and is hanging out with us. Do we have a camera that can get Augusto? Say hi to the ModPo people. Yeah, and we also have Allison, who came from. Did you come from far away? You did, didn't you?
Toronto.
Where's that portable mic, Kyle?
That he took away.
Where did you come from, Allison?
I come from a small town. We like to call it the Poem Town, Cobourg, Ontario,
Okay.
which is situated near Toronto.
Oh, so you drove a long way today? Yeah. Great.
I actually arose fairly early and took the train out.
And you've been a ModPoer for 5 years at least?
5 years.
Yeah, that's totally amazing. And we also have Yuval and Kyle and Patricia and Magdalena. We got to get the mic to Magdalena because she met us in London last year coming from Poland, and now for some reason she's in Canada.
Yes, I want to. I wanted to link my love for Canadian culture and American poetry. So.
And you
I'm
brought
here.
your aunt and uncle with you.
Yes.
Hi, aunt and uncle. So great. And that's Colleen Knight, the famous Colleen Knight, who's one of the great community TAs in ModPo. Hi, Colleen.
Hi, Al.
Thank you so much for everything you do for the ModPo citizenry.
You're most welcome.
And we have Max from Chicago. Hey, Max.
Hi, Al. Hi, everyone.
And Molly from Los Angeles.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Molly. And of course, Zach and Chris, who rented a car, came all the way up here with all this equipment. And Jason's thinking, isn't this Coles to Newcastle? Bringing Coles to Newcastle, bringing equipment to this place. But we brought our own. We're very fussy. We have our own equipment. And we also have Gertrude Stein with us today. So anyway, I just wanted to shout out to a ModPoer, and then we're going to get started. The number is 610-616-3208, 610-616-3208, and tonight Chris is answering the phone. The first caller is going to get to choose one of the books of Canadian poetry that I'm really excited about, that I'm about to show you. And this is partly, Zach, get a close-up, this is partly to make sure everybody buys Canadian books. First of all, Aaron is right here, Aaron's selected poetry, all right, and Planetary Noise is the subtitle, and it's fabulous. It's really fabulous. If you decide that this is the book you want, I can't send it to you until I get back to Philly because I need it, because I have another copy in Philly, but I need it because we're doing some more. I can't give out this book. This is Nasser Hussein's book that we just bought last night because it's been signed to me. But Nasser is a really interesting poet who decided to write a bunch of poems in which the vocabulary, the words, are only the three-letter abbreviations of airports. Right, so that's the constraint. And all the poems have basically concrete poem maps that are created out of the poems once the poems are written out of the airports. And then you can actually figure out what the poem says through the maps. The problem is that Nasser, he sort of wants to emphasize the fact that it would be very difficult for him to go to all these airports because of who he is. And he has a poem called Islamophobia, which is spelled out with three-letter airports. And that one doesn't have a map. It's the only one that doesn't have a map. And most of that poem is USA, 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 which is not America, but there's some American airport that has the initials USA. Anyway, that's that book. And it's called Skywrite Tings, and it's just published like this month at Coach House. This is Laura Broadbent's book, which Deanna Fong turned us on to, and what a delight, Deanna. In on the Great Joke. And the idea here is, Deanna, Deanna, you have to get the mic. So the idea is Lao Tzu decides to apply to be an instructor at a university.
Yes, so he's going to teach a course in which he does not teach. All of the students will write papers, and the papers will be graded, and then they'll pass the paper to the person to their left, and that's the grade that they will accept. Very, it's a really, really funny book, but also very serious, very philosophical.
And this afternoon, or this morning, we recorded a ModPo Plus video on meditation, on translation from this book, in which she puts together 21 translations of the opening lines, and then begins to riff on it, and it's so much fun. And so this is a book that the first caller could select. And just one more, Sina Kira's book, My Ariel, which is, you may think My Emily Dickinson. This is of course about Sylvia Plath, and it's a very good book. And we're going to be making a video tomorrow with Sina. Okay, so one shout out. We're going to get started. We have discussion forums where you can pose a question, and we have the Twitter feed where you can pose a question. And Ray Maxwell is doing with some friends some crowdsourcing of metadata having to do with the references that get made, and that's going to happen simultaneously. So if you're following Twitter, you'll be able to keep up with it. All right, here's the shout out, and then we'll get started. Nancy Carroll. So she lives in Germany with her sweetheart, as she calls them, Jens. And Nancy's very involved with ModPo and always follows the live webcasts. And this very webcast is no exception. So Nancy and Jens will be watching. So she says of Jens that they always have a poetry date. He doesn't do the poetry. He just watches the webcasts. Now, why does he like the webcasts? Well, same reason you guys drove all this way to hang out, because somehow it personalizes everything. You don't need the poetry. That's a little weird. Anyway, she says, he's funny. I've tried to get him to engage with the poems themselves, but he mostly just loves the webcasts. I suspect he finds pleasure in the sound and rhythm of academic intellectual discussion. I'm really feeling bad now. And I know he finds pleasure in the creative impulse inspired by this and that odd or spontaneous turn of a phrase. So I am shouting out not just to Nancy, a great ModPoer, but to Jens. Hi, Jens. I'm so glad you're watching and that you like the rhythm of this and hope that you'll read some poems. Okay. All right. So, do you want to start? Do we have a question in the forums?
Well, it's not a question, but it's a great story from Jeremy Dixon
Okay.
that he just posted on Twitter. It's so good. It's worth
Okay.
it, I swear.
All right. Okay.
All right. So Jeremy Dixon, first of all, hi, I love you.
Jeremy is a bookmaker and a poet in
Bookmaker,
Wales.
poet
He's
in
a
Wales.
great ModPoer.
So he writes in a 3-part tweet, a Stein story for Stein Week. This summer, I ran a bookmaking course, and a woman brought along a copy of Tender Buttons in order to cut it up just to recycle the cover into another book. But that's Tender Buttons. Don't you want to keep it? I said to her. Oh, I'll never read it anyway. Gertrude Stein is far too difficult to understand, and I can't be bothered. A total waste of my time, she said. So I turned to a carafe that is a blind glass. Maybe we can start with that poem. And as a group of bookmakers, we all close read it for 5 minutes, with everyone coming up with different ideas and interpretations, after which we all agreed what a genius Stein was. The woman decided to keep her book as it was and to take it home and read it from cover to cover, as it was already giving her ideas for making new pieces of art.
That's hilarious.
It's so good.
Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for sharing that, Jeremy.
That's great. Well, why don't you go to the thread and see if there's a question for the group?
MC, one of our dear pals, another
MC Catanese.
one of our dear pals posted
Okay.
a question about
All right.
repetition in Stein's
All
work
right.
and how it promotes defamiliarization.
Good.
There's some interest in that.
Let's
as a
start
topic.
with that.
Yeah.
So, and we do have someone on the phone. So let's answer the question from MC first. And I'm looking to my right to Aaron about repetition. I mean, can we speak generally about why repetition is something that poetry does and needs to do, and what kind of effect it creates, and what do you think about Stein's repetition?
I think
Big question.
Stein's repetition in general has inspired so many people, I think, to think differently about what a word means in context and how a word is partly given its meaning by being in context of another word. So a word that looks just repeated already has that same word beside it, which changes it.
Yeah.
So that you start to see the kind of changes that occur in words and in effects just when things are repeated. And if I could just briefly use an example, like if you
Yes,
look
please.
at, if I told him a completed portrait of Picasso, there's kinds of a lot of repetition in there, and I'll just go like presently, exactly, do they do, first, exactly, do they do, first, exactly, and first, exactly, do they do, and first, exactly, and do they do, and first, exactly, and do they do. This is all a part of a portrait of Picasso, so that, I mean, it's almost like a drum roll, like,
Yeah.
you know, like but it makes me laugh because it's almost like she's painting a portrait of Picasso as somebody so self-important that all his exactitude centers on, it sounds like after a while like he's going, and me, and me, and me.
Yeah, and the do they do has always struck me as comic because, I don't know, he's like, well, he wasn't an action painter in any specific sense, but he was an action-oriented painter, and there's a lot of doing, and she kind of mocks the doing by the do they do.
Also, he's doing, but I mean, he's the center of attention while he's doing. I think she mocks his center of attentionness, especially, you know, Napoleon is a good, comparing him
He's got a
without
Napoleonic
complex.
Yeah, absolutely sure. Well, thank you. Can we get the mic to Augusto, but meantime, I'd like Molly to say a word about repetition in Stein. Does it make you laugh sometimes, Molly? Let me play. Chris, are you ready to deal with, wow. I'm going to play a second. I don't know if you're going to hear it from Los Angeles, Molly, but I'm going to play a bit of Stein.
Told him if Napoleon, would he like it if I told him? If I told him, if Napoleon? Would he like it if Napoleon, if I told him? If I told him if Napoleon, if I told him? If I told him, would he like it? Would he like it if I told him?
So, Molly, is there comedy there somehow? comedy's
I
the wrong
think
word.
so. There's a little bit of
Pleasure.
a nursery rhyme feeling. It's kind of like she sells seashells down by the seashore, and as you repeat it over and over and switch the arrangement of the words, it starts to lose its meaning a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Max, are you there? What do you think about repetition in Stein? Then we're going to go to Augusto.
Just to go with the comedic or the kind of humoristic angle, reminds me a little bit of like Who's on First or something. That repetition. There's
Abbott
this
and
exact.
Costello? I
Yeah,
bet that's the
yeah,
first time Abbott
exactly.
and Costello and Stein have been used in the same sentence.
They have not.
I bet that's the first time.
Oh well, I'm glad to be innovating.
Hey, Abbott.
Yeah, I think that there's the repetition. There's this kind of exactitude, but there's also just this confusion that's introduced as well with repetition. I think that comes up a few places. Like, I mean, we start to wonder which Napoleon, right? Like that's
Right.
kind of
Yeah.
sort of that.
Thank you. Augusto, thoughts on repetition? What's it like for a person for whom English is a third language?
It's my fourth language, in fact.
It's your fourth language.
Yeah.
Even better. Does it? Let me play her again for a second. Tell us what your ears hear. Okay, so language 1 is Portuguese.
Portuguese
language 2,
and Italian, because my mother taught me Italian when I was born.
Nice of her.
That's
2.
It's a long story.
3rd is French.
Well, I would say that English and French are third.
Tied for 3rd.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I speak them both.
Listen with your third language ears and tell us what you hear.
Okay.
Now, not now, and now. Now, exactly as kings, feeling full for it.
I'm going to skip
Exactly
forward.
do
Ready?
this. And do they do the first exactly? And do they do the first exactly, at first exactly, first as exactly, at first as exactly, presently as presently, as presently? He.
Okay.
What do you hear?
Musicality.
Yes.
I think
it's music, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I think when a poet uses repetition on poetry, I think consciously he's giving some musicality as well to just say what he wants or he or she wants.
Yeah.
You say, I mean, it's not repetition for repetition. I mean, it's the sound. It's when you listen to it or when you read it, it's the sound of the repetition that it's behind the meaning.
Yeah.
That's
terrific.
That's what I think.
Thank you. We have someone on the phone, and as we're getting to that person, I would like to ask Kyle. Hey, Kyle, if you would come and join us in the 5th chair for a little bit. You okay with that? Okay, and who's got the portable mic now that Kyle's up here? Deanna's got it. No, yeah. No, you can. You're fine. You've got a mic of your own here. Yeah. Just wanted to make sure we knew where that was. Okay, thanks, Kyle. Chris, who do we have on the phone?
Hey, Al. We have Ray Maxwell calling from Washington, D.C.
Okay. Hello, Ray.
Am I live?
You are live. This is Al in Montreal.
Oh, boy.
A week ago, we
boy,
saw
let
each
me,
other face to face.
That's right. I want to do a quick shout out for the volunteers tonight on the metadata project. We've got Allison, Magdalena, Dina, Meredith, and Colette. All volunteers, all step forward.
Ray, can you say very, very briefly what it is that they're doing and why?
Okay, what they're doing is they are making a notation with a kind of a timestamp because each one has a quarter of an hour period, and they are going to write down the poem that's mentioned, the poet that's mentioned, or any subject that has to do with ModPo that's mentioned during that period of time.
Yeah.
And the purpose of harvesting this metadata is to have a way of sort of indexing, if we should decide to in the future, the proceedings, if you will, of the live webcast.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a tool for researchers later on, but it's also kind of cool for us to know after the fact what we discussed.
Right. Thank you, Ray, for doing that, and thanks for explaining it. There are many people in the room who are thinking, that's cool, but Jason Camelot may be the one who's thinking it the thinkiest, because this is so right up your alley, and We're so in sync. And yeah, Jason just said it's so cool with 2 thumbs up, Ray. And the really great thing about it, and I know Jason shares the spirit, is that ModPo is free and open and non-credit, and people have been, Ray's been part of it for 7 years, since 2012 in Washington, D.C., and they're just committed to making this thing last. And one way to make it last is to collect a lot of information. And Chris Martin has a fantasy, I don't know if we're actually going to get to it, but of indexing the whole thing and make the whole thing database driven, so you can basically take the syllabus of poems and videos as you wish and just sort of create your own syllabus, because ModPo Plus is now a couple of hundred poems and videos as a supplement, and it's just overwhelming. So thanks, Ray. Do you want to say something about Stein? Do you have a question, or you just wanted to say hi?
I always have something to say about Stein, but I'm busy taking notes, so I'm going to say hi.
Well, say one thing, and then I'm going to turn to Karis and then Kyle to respond to whatever it is that you say.
I often wonder then if Gertrude Stein knew Josephine, what's her name, who was the actress and the lady that was in the French army? Josephine Baker. I wonder if Gertrude Stein knew Josephine Baker in Paris.
I'm going to take that question as not that Karis either has to know yes or no, whether that's correct, but sort of the spirit or gist of the question. Is that of interest to you, Karis?
That is.
I don't know the answer.
Yeah, that was quite a question, Ray. Let's just stipulate that it was a really great question. But maybe your metadata people can figure that out. There must be a bunch of people Googling right now. So.
I bet they are.
Yeah. All right, Ray, thank you so much. Take care, man.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Sign it off.
Okay. 610-616-3208. Anna? Yeah. Oh, Ray, he gets another book? I'm just gonna pull rank here and say, Ray, you're not getting a book. The second caller is gonna. He gets a book. This guy has so many books.
We need some terms.
Magdalena, you called me on that. That was really good. Second caller gets a book. 610-616-3208. All right, Anna, what do we got?
Well, it's actually interesting that Ray brought up Josephine Baker, because there's a question in the discussion forums about Stein's other artist friends while she was living in Paris, and what kind of cross influences there may have been between the painters and other artists and other writers she was talking to and working with.
Okay. So the question is really going to be about, I'm going to make it into a question about the painterliness or the visuality of Stein. And I didn't warn Karis I was going to ask her about that, but I would love to hear anything you have to say. And let's get the mic to Jason and see if he has something to say. And then I'll also ask Molly if she wants to say something about that. So visual, Karis?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to deflect a little bit and say that I'm definitely interested in those aspects of influence.
Yeah.
But I'm maybe even more interested in how those connections are represented, or how we could represent them through data visualization, creating networks where we highlight who knew whom, and so on.
That's so cool. We've come to Canada, which is sort of the home of poetics data visualization.
Very geeky.
In a really cool way, in a way that I very much admire. So if you were to get like a giant grant to do data visualization of the poetry networks having to do with the poets and the painters, you would be able to do that. And the visualization helps us how?
I mean, I think it helps us see connections that we didn't necessarily know about.
Yeah.
And also not just first, people who actually knew each other, but people who knew people who knew people. So you can expand that network and think about influence.
Right.
The 6 degrees of separation, sort of.
And a place to start would be Stein's portraits, because she did verbal portraits of painters, which is Picasso's one of them, but which is a nice slick move, right? Doing a verbal portrait of a painter who's doing particularly experimental painting. Jason, any thoughts about Stein and visual art and anything like that?
Yeah, I think I want to say, first of all, I had no idea what was going to be happening when I came here tonight. I had no idea. And you chose really my favorite poetry recording of all the poetry recordings I've ever listened to. That one.
And we know the year. It was 1934. She was visiting the U.S.
That's right. And we know where it was recorded.
In New York somewhere, right?
Yeah, in a speech lab. So I guess in answer to your question, that one of the things that recording makes me think of is how does a portrait sound, right? And it's not just the arrangement of words and the repetition, but actually how does she intone or not intone at times this poem, right? And so how is she actually speaking a portrait? And when I first looked at that poem on the page, I had no clue how to read it, you know? And then I heard her voice, which rings like a bell, right? It's so clear, her pronunciation. And that's one of the things that really, I think, captured me when I first heard that recording. And going back to where it was recorded in the 30s on a transcription disc, which Chris Mustasa could tell us all about, right? In William Cabell Greet's speech lab, and he was mostly collecting American
sort of
dialects.
A linguist and phoneticist.
That's right, yeah. And so we can think about this poem and her reading of it as a performance of a verbal portrait, but we also think of it sitting among hundreds of other dialect recordings, right? And where does Gertrude Stein's voice fit, you know, into that context? So those are some things that I'm thinking of in relation to
Thank you for bringing those things up. I think I asked Molly to have a comment about this. Molly, you have something you want to add, and then we're going to go to someone on the phone.
You did, but it looks like Emily's here.
Emily Harnett's here? Emily, say hello.
Hi.
Emily Harnett is here. Hello.
Back and happy from the dentist. How are you, Al?
Your smile is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're not numb or anything. You're okay. You can talk.
No, I'm just
okay.
giddy.
Great. All right. Well, we're going to go to Molly to talk a little bit about Stein. Then we'll go to the phone. And Emily, I'm sure we'll get you in.
I am thinking about the limits of language versus visual art, and thinking about the interplay of Stein and Picasso and her other contemporaries. And it seems to me, even though she's using such an experimental mode of writing, that there's not as much possibility in language and text on a page as there is in a visual medium. And maybe that's not fair, but
very cool. Thank you, Molly. Chris, who do we have on the phone?
Hey, Al, we have Allison calling from California, USA.
Hey, Allison.
Hi.
Is this Allison B?
Yeah.
Hey, Allison. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We have an amazing crew here. And
yes,
I
can see that.
You're going to get a book. So
oh my goodness.
Seen as my Ariel. Laura Broadbent's in on the great joke. And
Thank you.
I'm not giving you all of them. You got to pick one. And Erin Moray, who's sitting to my right, her selected poems, Planetary Noise. This one I have to send you a little later, but you want to pick one?
I'd like Planetary Noise, please.
Okay, Erin, I'm sorry to put you on the spot. Would you inscribe it to Allison? Sure. After the okay, so Erin's going to inscribe it, and then when I get back to Philly, I'm going to mail it to you. It has my notes in it. Is that okay?
That's wonderful. Thank you.
All right, fantastic. That's fantastic. I just want to say, by the way, that Ray Maxwell tweeted, "I have too many books." So he was fine. And Dina Perot, who was supposed to come here but has strep throat, she's somewhere in Canada, tried to call but can't get through. Keep trying, Dina. Okay, Allison, do you have a question for the group? And I'm going to ask Erin to start in response to whatever it is. And this is so much fun. And I want Colleen Knight, the famous Colleen Knight, to get the microphone so she can respond as well. So I don't know where the mic is.
I don't have an exact question, but one of the things I'm thinking about in terms of Gertrude Stein this year at ModPo is Gertrude Stein as a conversationalist. And I feel like this conversation has already begun because we're talking about her relationship to visual art and the limits of language and things like that. But one of her art forms really was conversation. And I guess I'm trying to see how that is captured in her writing. And I have been conversing with another ModPoer, Jay Martin, in a thread kind of about this a little bit today.
Fantastic. Allison, will you hear the responses offline and we'll get another caller? Is that okay?
Absolutely.
All right, great. Thank you. By the way, Jay Martin is in San Francisco, so you guys are not that far.
Hey, we could
Do a
hang
meetup.
out. Cool. Thanks
Yeah,
for the
and we're
tip.
going to be out there in January, by the way. We're going to put together a meetup in San Francisco.
Wonderful.
You're like in you're at Sacramento.
I'm in
You're
Woodland.
in Sacramento?
Yeah, near Sacramento.
Yeah, we're not going to Sacramento. Sorry.
No, but I'll
we
come
are
to
going to San Francisco. Did I say something nasty about Sacramento? I'm so sorry. But come up to San
I don't
Francisco.
live in
It's a cool place.
Sacramento.
What?
I live in Woodland.
Yeah, okay. Where's Woodland?
Woodland is in the Central Valley. It's
Yeah.
south of Davis.
Oh my goodness. Well, it's all the same category for me. So come up to San Francisco. Sorry. Anyway, Allison, thank you so much for everything you do for ModPo. So,
Hey, thank you, Al.
all
Talk to you
right.
later.
Yeah, cool. So, Aaron, what do you think? Conversation. Can we take that as a very large question? I feel like people talk about Stein as much as they read Stein. There's almost a conversation that gets created just by that. Does that make any sense? There's a social quality to that woman.
Oh, for sure. I mean, we all know, too, that just in general, that she held salons, that she had people over and people
Yeah.
talked. And
Yeah.
I mean, that was in an era before television. And
Right.
for anybody here grow up in the era before TV? Would you have how old were you? I'll interview Al here. How old were you when you got a TV in your house?
I was actually born and existed before the house had a TV, so I guess I count as a yes to that question.
Did you learn to read before you got a TV?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, you and I, we're it.
Yeah, that's
There's
it.
Nobody else
That's it.
pushing
Yeah.
we've got somebody else. Well, we're all outing ourselves as older, but you were going to say. So, a salon was a thing. Like, what are we going to do Thursday at 7? Let's go to Gertrude's.
Well, we also would
'Cause she would perform, really.
Yeah, perform but people talked. People had like conversation. Instead of turning on a little box and seeing it, you had to make it for yourself. So like you had to make your own TV every day, every evening, kind of thing. And so I think that the art of conversation and speaking was more valued, because definitely like if you go over to somebody's house and you're in a salon, like say we're here in this room, but kind of we have wine and these tables aren't here. If you're going to say something, you don't want to like make a idiot of yourself. I mean, you might anyways, but you want to try to contribute something that furthers the conversation. And the thing about, in a sense, Gertrude Stein's work is about furtherance, because she's always extending the piece a bit further, extending it. And part of contributing to a conversation is to help the conversation flourish.
I love what you just said. I hadn't really thought of it this way. I think it's great. And I think that what we're trying to do here with this like bizarre virtual salon here, like ModPo, is to create a conversation informal enough. I mean, we had no plan going into this webcast. We never have a plan. It's created by people who are responding. And I think we aspire to that, even though...
I do too.
Yeah, and I just want to say, too, before I turn to Colleen Knight, right, you have a mic. Everybody, don't be embarrassed by this, but everybody, when we talk Aaron Moret, around Montreal, they all say, if you go over to her house, it's like a salon. Right? Don't you pride yourself on that? You do create that, don't you? And for years, it's sort of your generation of
I
radical
think
women poets in Montreal wanting to, am I right about that?
Yeah, I think my house would be only one place that serves that kind of role.
Sure.
I can think of others, maybe not in the poetry community, but definitely in the visual art and curating community, that to bring people together and have these conversations and share your different experiences, so that you could benefit from other people's experiences.
Well, I'm very moved by that, because this is one way in which there is some kind of lineage, some kind of line that's being drawn back from you and your colleagues who feel the way you do, back to Stein, who really thought this was very important. Let's put really interesting people in the room, and let's see what can come of it, right? And that's just such a great thing. And I think those of us who are stuck inside a university don't do enough of that. Our classes there's a syllabus, and today, if it's Tuesday, we're reading this chapter, and you know, it'd be really great if Lao Tzu were hired by the universities. The whole thing would fall apart, and people would just find the way. Colleen Knight, the famous Colleen Knight. What do you think?
About conversation and
and Stein, yeah, or conversation generally.
I really think about the Napoleon poem when you talk about conversation. If I told him, there's a lot there.
Yeah.
In terms of visual arts, I think she's just speaking to Picasso and just saying, you know, if I told him, it could be about his behavior, it could be about his art in general, it could be about their friendship. She has some message she wants to send to him, but she's not quite sure she wants to tell him. But
if I told him,
yeah,
but who's going to tell him?
You know, they're both pretty bold people, I'm thinking.
Yeah, I think you're thinking right. There was a third person I wanted to get involved in this conversation. Speaking of conversations, and I can't remember who it is, but Kyle. Hey, you're at the table.
Hello.
What do you think of anything we've said so far about Stein? How is Stein? How's that working out for you?
Well, like I said before the webcast, it reminds me a lot of negative drawing. So you sketch the outline of what you're trying to describe with a bunch of seemingly random lines when you're in the process of creating the artwork.
Yeah.
So when I read A Long Dress, immediately I got the sense that, well, she's outlining the long dress with seemingly random, unassociated words.
I think that's a really good reading of A Long Dress. Okay, so we have the phone number is 610-616-3208. Anna, how are you? Do you have someone on the phone? Okay, so give us a call. Anna, you have tweets and thread.
Yes.
I'm looking at the tweet as well, and there's a lot going on there.
There's a lot happening in the
I'm
threads,
just going to quote Terry Talty on Stein as a conversationalist. Stein is a conversationalist. If I asked her, would she tell me, would she mock me in a portrait? Would she do it like charades? Would we know which she did me? That's weird. When she did you, when she did Picasso's bro. Yeah. Terry's doing a little Stein on Twitter. I'm sure the people who are not following this, who are picking that up from Terry's feed, are wondering what happened to Terry. Anna, what do we got?
There is a great conversation happening in the discussion forum amongst some of our intrepid grad students who are taking our grad seminar that we're, teaching together this fall.
You're disclosing that we're teaching a grad seminar through ModPo.
Secret thing.
But
they're really
grad
interested.
Office is going to find out. Tell them.
They are
Tell your
interested in
grad
the-
director that we're doing this. Sorry, I keep interrupting you.
It's okay. They're interested in the materiality of Stein's language and how Stein actually draws our attention to the materiality of language in her poems. Specifically, they were looking at A Long Dress. And as we've talked about this a bunch already, so maybe we can just stick with A Long Dress, but the Picasso poem, the portrait.
Yeah. So materiality. I think we should probably ask Erin if she's willing just to sort of explain why would anybody think of a word as a thing, right? I mean, this is such an important topic, but it's very hard to say simply. I wondered if you would give it a try. And then I wonder, Kyle, if you would leave the seat to Magdalena. Magdalena, would you be willing to come up to the front? Okay, fantastic. And Deanna, I promise not to put you on the spot, but I wonder if you would get the mic and say something about this whole question. I know that in terms of sound, you care about the kind of materiality, so, okay. Erin, why do we even talk about materiality in poetry? It seems so non-material.
I'll just try to not say very much because I would actually like to throw it out to either Karis or Deanna.
Okay, good. And I want to get Emily Harnett in on this too, so remind me of that. Go ahead, Erin.
Right,
Sorry.
okay. No, so I guess just to take a little slice of it so I could throw it back at you, just the whole idea of the sonic, like looking at a words, the relation between words, the relations between sounds, the not necessarily as generators of fixed meaning, but as actual material factors that are working with each other. And I'll just throw something like, for example, even like sonically things, like I just wonder if we look at a long dress, for example, and it starts talking about machines, and people were talking in one of the video discussions about that poem about the construction, the fabrication by machine of clothing,
Right.
which I'm sure Gertrude Stein never had a single thing that was made by a machine.
Right.
But that's sort of beside the point. But I was thinking about another approach that wasn't mechanized in that era, and that was the an homonym for a laundress, which is a laundress. The person who actually has to wash at length the dresses that people wear. So I just thinking about materiality of words in that kind of sense.
Well, I think a long dress really is about the material predecessing, the material context, pretext for language getting created. What is the current that makes machinery? Well, she's not just talking about dress factory. She's talking about poem factory, and what current is current, electric current, currency, meaning the presentness. How does that get made in a machine-like way? And she and Williams and others in that early modern period were thinking, a poem is a machine. We're making something. It's productive. And that leads to the feeling that it's not just air that's being made in a poem. Anyway, Deanna, what are your thoughts on materiality?
Well, first I wanted to say I like that point about materiality also encompassing something to do with the labor of working with things too. Like, I think that's very important. And was hesitant to talk about this because I haven't actually read any of the poems.
But go for it.
Yeah, but I'd like to relate it to something maybe that I'm working on. I've been doing a lot of work on Dadaist sound poems. And so I think when I think about the materiality of language, it's sort of caught between the idea of the word as sound and the word as having meaning. And every time, there was this impulse in Dadaist sound poetry to try and break language down to its more, phonetic components so that we could escape from its sort of instrumental use. But I think the more that people tried to do that, the more they realized that, even if you break a word down into a phoneme or a sound or a breath or something, it always, there's no sort of limit case as to where signification ends and where sound begins.
Yeah.
So I think that's also, quite visible in Gertrude Stein's poems too, that we fluctuate between hearing them for what they mean, but also hearing them sonically, as you were saying before.
Yeah. Emily Harnett, hi. Is Emily there?
Hear me?
Hi, Emily.
Quite hear you. I think I can now. But
Did you hear what we've been saying?
I did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here's my. Let me just sort of translate where I think we're going with this and get your response. I'm really interested in your response. I mean, all writing should have these qualities, but poetry is the genre. Sorry to use that word, but I don't have another one. Poetry is the category, the kind of writing where we think about these things. But it's true of all writing, right? That that sounding word is not it's not going to be. We're not going to limit things. It's always going to be open. Anyway, your thoughts.
Yeah, when I think about language as material, I guess I think about it more as language as artifactual in some way or historical. When I think about Gertrude Stein's poems, how they anticipate things we talk about later in the course, one of the perfect sites for seeing how what we think of as language is functional or correct language, and meaning itself is dependent on politics and the people who, I'm a teacher now, who teach the rules of grammar and teach definite meanings or constellate the range of possible meanings. So that language is a product of its time, an object of its time, the way anything you encounter in a museum would in some way. And that's something I'm always thinking about. And materiality too as sound. And I think it's helpful too to think of the materiality of language because it reminds you that language in that spoken capacity is something which emerges from actual bodies and actual human beings in contact with one another.
Right.
And the more abstract we treat language, the more we kind of erase that social context and also erase the intimacy which language encodes.
That's so great, Emily. Thank you. And you put me in mind of Susan Howe considering Stein and Dickinson together in My Emily Dickinson when she says, "Who polices questions of grammar?"
Definitely
Right?
something I'm
And
thinking of.
the consequences of that policing are bodily, not just, oh, I had my poem suppressed. Right? That's a very political thing. And boy, did they go after Gertrude Stein, especially in the 1950s, calling her insane. I mean, it was just the attacks on Gertrude Stein were brutal. In the 50s, also in the 30s as
yeah.
well. But in the 50s, it was renewed because there was so much pressure to do more conventional things. And Stanzas in Meditation came out, and that was crazy. And, the attacks on Gertrude Stein were so brutal. And you wonder, what's the motivation here? Well, who polices questions of grammar? It goes back to the basic thing, like, we need to make sure that English stays exactly the way it is, all that stuff. That conservative impulse becomes anti-modernist, anti-poetic, anti-Stein, and it has real consequences. Yeah. We have someone on the phone, and then I want to see if Magdalena would be willing to be part of the conversation. Who's on the phone?
Yes, calling all the way from the Netherlands, we have Abdul.
Abdul. Great. Hello, Abdul. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well. Can you hear me as well?
Oh, perfect. What time is it there? Late.
Yeah, it's 1:30 in the night. Quite very late. I'm making it a bit later than usually.
Oh, we're really good. What we're about to say is going to be so electric that you're going to be up all night.
Yes, I am. It's definitely. I'm very excited, and so it's going to be hard to get to bed after this.
Oh,
But
I'm
I've got
sorry.
enough to
I wish-
contemplate about when I lie in bed.
Yeah. So is this your first year in ModPo?
Well, I started, I think, last year. I started last year.
Okay. And were you able to do the reading of the Stein and the watching of the videos this week?
I've read a lot of Stein, and I also read quite a bit of her second bundle, Geography and Place, if I'm correct.
Great.
Yeah,
Very
and
cool.
it's a much longer bundle, so I didn't go through all of it, because I think it's a
That's
couple hundred
okay.
pages long.
Well,
But I really loved it, and so that's also the reason I called, because obviously it was really
yeah.
convenient that you were talking about Stein. And also I wanted to call just to have you on the phone afterwards, because I love the ModPo series, and it's really helped me a lot learning about modernism. So it's really awesome, and I try to always watch your 5 minutes.
Oh, ModPo Minute.
Videos, etc.
Yes. Oh,
Yes, ModPo
Abdul, you're
Minute.
making
Yes,
us
they're
happy.
awesome as well.
Zach Gardner, who
Zach.
doesn't smile a lot during these webcasts because he's so intense.
they're
on
awesome.
He is smiling because that was our new project. It's paying off. Abdul, may I ask, what do you do during the day? Do you have other things you have to do, or can you do poetry all the time?
Well, I really do a lot of poetry. I love doing poetry, but I'm looking on obviously getting a bachelor, something with culture or literature. I still have to see exactly what direction,
Great.
but I'm still looking what I'm going to do.
Okay.
So.
If you ever get a chance to come to the U.S., will you come to Philadelphia and hang out with us at the Kelly
Definitely.
Writers House?
That's going to be the first place. The first place I'm going to visit is going to be Philadelphia.
The Chamber of Commerce needs to cut me a little slice of this because, well, most people come. They come to New York from Europe. New York is one of the first stops, and Philly's just 90 miles. It's an hour and 20 minutes on the train. So come and hang out with us. The Writers House is always open, and if you just say, I'm a ModPo person, I'm Abdul, I'm here, we will drop everything and hang out with you. So do you...
That's it. I'll put it in my agenda.
Please do. I mean that. Everything is open, everything is free. This is the point. Do you want to... Magdalena is here from Poland, and I'd love to hear her response to whatever you have to say about Stein. Do you want to say something about your experience reading Stein?
Well, one thing that I experienced, two things I want to say very shortly is, apart from being a sound poet, that he does a lot of things with sound and repetition, I also found that he is a lyrical poet. He had also a lot of narrative, personal value, and I think, I'm definitely talking about the first couple of poems in Geography and Place. where she would narrate a tale about a young girl and living with her mother, etc. But on the other side, what really captivated me about Stein is her political insight and relaying these political insights through the use of language and repetitions. And so I just want to, I don't know how, I know there's been a lot of, obviously, Stein is very famous about her sounds and her repetitions and defamiliarization.
Yes.
But what about her politics? You know, I think she is also such a strong political poet. And, perhaps I'm completely wrong about thinking about this, but I know that in the geography and place, imperialism came to discussion. I think fascism with the Italians. And please forgive me if I'm completely wrong, completely off, that I completely interpreted wrong. But that's the one thing that I just wanted to comment on and say that.
All right.
And
thank you so much, Abdul. Thank you. What we're going to do is
good luck with the ModPo series and everything. And I'll keep watching, man.
Yes. Thank you so much.
All the best. Greetings.
Abdul, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. I want to take the first half of that, in the interest of time, getting into Stein's politics. There's going to be a lot of, Ray's group is going to have to do a lot of metadata work on that. I want to take the narrative side. If we get to the politics, that's great. Let's take the narrative. Magdalena, I'm going to read you what Stein said about narrative, and then let's talk a little bit about it, okay? She wrote, I think one naturally is impressed by anything having a beginning, a middle, and an ending when one is emerging from adolescence. American writing has been an escaping, not an escaping, but an existing with the necessary feeling of one thing succeeding another thing, of anything having a beginning and a middle and an ending. That's a big challenge, to be criticizing beginnings, middles, and ends. Magdalena, what is the effect of that? How radical is that? How does it feel to be, I mean, you say you like this poetry, so how does it feel to be liking a poetry that basically criticizes narrative?
I think narrative is part of what we're taught to be structured, and we're taught to make our writing argumentative, and I think she's speaking for a certain freedom and imagination. And actually, I think we've talked about this in ModPo, that the great thing about poetry is sometimes you don't have to worry so much about not understanding or not always getting the logic, but sometimes you can just enjoy it. And I kind of think about this repetition thing, because repetition is kind of saying the same thing. And we're always said, you know, when you use another sentence, say something new, say something original. But I think a repetition gives you a kind of rest, and it allows you to actually, it gives you just a space to feel the poem. So I actually love her repetitions for that.
Thank you, Magdalena. Max, you're there. I wonder if, I'm going to call on somebody else, but Max, you'll be up next to comment on this whole question of narrative. Yes, Max?
Sure.
Great.
Right now.
Okay, so who wants to comment on the freedom thing? I heard a sigh or a affirmation over here to my right from Aaron, so I'm going to ask Aaron and maybe Allison. Freedom, if you get rid of narrative, the requirements of narrative, Magdalena used the word freedom. I think that's right. You are freed of what? And how does it feel to be free when you're writing or reading? To be freed from, I don't know what's going to happen, or I didn't follow that middle, so I don't know what's going to happen to me at the end. What does that freedom mean? And why are we so willing, culturally, to be entrapped by the requirements of narrative if freedom is the effect of critiquing narrative? I really loaded that up. Allison, and then Aaron, and then Max.
So just to make sure I know what you're asking, so you're saying, why do we feel we need to be trapped?
Oh, that's one way, the negative way of thinking of it. Why are we socialized to want narrative Like when we go to the beach in the summer, they say, "Oh, we'll just, read a book that has a really strong story." No.
There are a couple of things, I
Don't
think
do
about
that.
4 points, 3 or 4 points here, and I'm going to try and tie them all together and wrap it right up very quickly with a bow.
Wow.
Let's see if I can do this.
Okay.
See, that's like the opposite of what we're looking for.
No.
So originally, when you were speaking about the painterliness of Stein, and Deanna was also speaking about breaking down, and I was thinking about this child that was on the train today. I somehow managed to unknowingly and without any effort whatsoever complete the homework, so I'm pretty impressed with myself. There were 2 little ones in the train, and one was shrieking at regular intervals, a very small child, about a toddler. And I'm quite familiar with this because, as many of you ModPors know, I work for a major grocery retailer. So the soundtrack to my day is children singing opera. I'm always very interested in this shrieking because it reminds me of dogs, when one dog in the neighborhood starts howling and then the other one is howling in response. And I always wonder what the dogs are actually saying. And I often wonder what the children are communicating to each other. There was another little one as I was taking photographs at the window of the train. And I have a friend who's overseas with whom I share the very mundane details of our lives through photography. And as I was taking photos of yet another farmland as we entered the city, I think I'm losing my mic.
No, you're good.
Is that good?
Chris, we good?
Great. I started wondering if I should keep taking photographs because I really enjoy the farmlands of the Eastern Townships, but I wasn't sure my friend who lives in an urban metropolis would find every single farmstead quite as exciting as I do. The little one in the back of the car was repeatedly spewing, or I guess you'd say ejaculating the phrase, "Oh my God," and kept repeating again and again the phrase, "Oh my God," in an almost exact, almost sort of, I linked this "oh my God" repetition and the shrieking of the other little child, and yet another farmstead coming up with the "oh my God," and I'm thinking, "oh my God," and I mean, it got me thinking about, the whole idea of, does God create humanity or does humanity create the idea of God, and, the wonder of nature. But also, I was thinking, how can I bring this back around?
You're doing the thing that we're talking about, by
The
way.
child is Steining, right? I guess you could say, because why shouldn't we break it down? I mean, I think of like espresso. I'm thinking of coffee, espresso. Expressionist painting, and the idea. It's not so much. I mean, it doesn't have to be a breaking down. It's a freeing. But I mean, what is the freeing? The other day I woke up and I thought, maybe relevant to certain things I've seen in the media. What if I just woke up and I wasn't a woman? Like, what if I just woke up and I was a person? And I was having this thought about what my day would be like if I just woke up and I knew myself as a person, as, quite a few people do, I'm sure. But as for myself, I feel like I am, what was the word you used? In the social norm, and this is my identity, and I am comfortable with that, but also I am trapped by that in a certain sense.
Yeah.
So the child is not trapped. The child is not trapped within the narrative, and the child has nothing to break down. And I suppose nor does Stein.
Yeah. Snaps for Allison
Does
Fraser.
that work?
No, it works really well because, I mean, the problem was, Aaron, I want to turn to you next and then to Max. The problem with the attacks on Stein is that they said things like, "Oh, she's speaking childish gibberish," and that attack on her left her supporters to leave alone the whole question of her relationship to children learning the language. And for decades, we didn't go back to that. But that is one way to understand children. I've taught Stein to kids in grade school. It works really well, and it works for some of the reasons that you're articulating. So thank you. Aaron, what do you think about this whole thing of narrative
I got all
and
these
convention?
notes on my hand.
Yeah,
I'll
read
just
your
hold
hand.
it up to the mic.
Say one thing that's on your mind
Well,
about this.
I'm just going to say some link things, but I wanted to link to this too, that just the idea of point of view, that there's that one narrative, if we want narrative to just be telling the whole story in an order that nobody's going to be questions about it, one narrative shuts down other possible narratives and other possible
yes.
ways of looking at something. And I think Stein tries not to shut. I don't know how much she tries, if she has to make an effort or if she just does it, but tries not to shut those kinds of things down. It also is a way, that type of narrative is a way of shoring up the authority of the author. It's a kind of legalistic device in a sense. The other thing is that when you look at narrative, really, like we say, well, this Stein's poetry is a narrative, or her work is a narrative, or this person's work isn't narrative. I get accused of that sometimes. But it doesn't take very much. Like the units of narrative can be very small. And I have a whole talk, I think, in whatever that book that I wrote was, My Beloved Wager, called One Red Shoe, about narrative. And like if you have the words just one red shoe, that's narrative. Like already there's so much packed into that. Like red shoes, a person's not going to, work in, it's like red shoes are special shoes. Why is there only one red shoe? Right. And like it's kind of like right away, like questions start to accrue, not just accrue to that, and a story your brain wants to link that up and make some kind of a story out of it. So narrative is like a natural human brain function, and it requires very small elements. And just to go back to point of view in closing, that in keeping this one kind of point of view and shutting down other points of view of the narrative, or possible narratives, we also kind of shut down other ways that differential brains work. I've just been doing some work with somebody whose sister has schizophrenia and writes things, and actually, like, the stuff is great. And I don't mind. It's like Stein, in a sense. I don't mind if it doesn't make this other kind of sense, right? So I basically try to encourage her sister not to shut her into making a kind of sense, but to try and look at the sense that's already there in her sister's different way of thinking. And it's amazing.
Yeah. That's, all those points are amazing. And that came from your hand? That's amazing.
I had,
can we...
Do you need this do you need my hand for the metadata?
Put that in the book, and we'll mail that off. Yeah, we last week we talked about a Ray Armentrout poem, one of her early poems, where it's like a 3-line poem, 2-line poem.
Oh,
and
she's wonderful that way.
Yeah, it starts with a girl is running, right?
Uh-huh.
Don't tell me she's running for the bus. It's called Anti-Short Story.
Yeah.
The poem is called Anti-Short Story. If the girl is running, that's good. If our impulse is to narrativize, we can do that. We don't need the authority of the writer to tell us why she's running or what she's running for, because that could be wrong anyway. Mm-hmm. I think authority is all wrapped up in this. Max, your thought on this? Then we're going to take a call, and then we're going to do final words. We're going to go all the way around and do final words.
Sure. I just want to call attention to the cultural critique that's in Stein's statement on narrative. She says very specifically that American writing has been an escaping, not an escaping, but an existing. She seems to want to point to something social or in the culture, or some aspect of America or the United States as a concept or a nation. I guess this is kind of wading in a little bit into the political question.
That's okay too, because we did avoid it.
We did, because it's really, really thorny, as
very
we know,
thorny.
Janet Malcolm's book that we read together in Fellows.
Right, Janet Malcolm writes about it, right?
Yeah, maybe we can bracket that for another time. But I think that there's a critique in her and what she says here, a narrative about this kind of American idea of progress, this confidence in history as a progression of events, this kind of confidence in a sort of manifest destiny idea.
Oh yeah, Max. I mean, all the 19th century ideas about progress. You know, Stein, thanks partly to her teacher William James, really wanted to question how progress occurs and how natural progress is, and how we get from A to Z, and why we get from A to Z rather than from A to L and back to C. So, And that's a great resistance. And in the larger sense of politics, she's quite radical in that regard. She's
Sure.
really anti-Victorian, anti-realist in the old sense, in the 19th century realist, anti-industrial in a lot of ways, as was Dickinson.
Sure.
Anyway, thank you, Max. We have someone on the phone. We're going to respond to that person, and then we're going to get lots of final words. We're going to go all the way around. So, who do we have on the phone?
Calling from Montana, our CTA friend Nancy.
Nancy, great. Nancy, can you hear me?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, is this Nancy Landy?
Yes, it is.
How are you?
I'm fine.
How the hell
I'm
do I
about
know these things? I
20
don't even have a
minutes
good memory.
behind in the conversation, though.
Yeah. How are you?
I'm good.
Great. It's good to hear you. Montana's good.
It's more than good.
We heard that Calgary got a ton of snow, like 2 feet or something.
Oh, we've had snow
6
already,
inches,
but
okay.
it's not sticking.
All right. Good. So
But I wanted to
yes.
comment on the Picasso piece.
Okay.
First of all, I just love Stein. I totally admire how she broke away from anything you could call understandable or normal.
Right.
And when I listened to the recording today, as you played it,
Yes.
I literally saw the lines in his cubist works. And as I heard her lines, I saw the written lines against the painted lines mirroring each other. And it was the first time I heard that.
That's fascinating. So what you're saying is she was drawing, she was
Yes.
doing the painting through the
Yes.
words.
Yes.
That's really great. Fantastic. I think we're going to use that as a basis for a little riffing on it, Nancy.
Okay.
So listen to it offline, and then we're going to get some final words, and that'll be great. It's a great way to start. So thank you so much for calling. Thanks for everything you're
And
doing.
love the 5-minute poems, too.
ModPo Minute.
Shout out for that.
Well, we are going to do, Aaron and Karis do not know, and Deanna don't know this, but after the poem talk on Saturday, we're each going to do a ModPo Minute with the three of you, and we haven't shown you the poems yet, but one of them is an Aaron Moray poem, which you aren't allowed to talk about.
I thought we got to pick straws.
Oh, we can work that out. Anyway, there are 3 more. We're going to have so many Canadian ModPo Minutes that everybody's going to think the Canadians took over the whole show. So I'm really worried about that. And maybe Jason over breakfast on Saturday will be able to. Is it Saturday or Friday? Saturday we'll be able to do it too. All right. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Val.
Okay.
And nice to see Emily and Max for a change.
Yeah, oh, that's great. Max and Emily, good to see you for a change. Why don't we ask Molly, Max, and Emily very briefly each to reply to this issue or to say something about this issue. It's quite remarkable. We've been over it before, but let's do it anyway, which is Nancy's suggestion that in a way, Stein is painting with words. She's actually painting. She's creating the delineations. She's doing what you do, what a painter does. Sounds basic. It sounds like we've been saying this all along, but when you think about it hard, it's pretty astonishing because words are supposed to mean, but pigment oil applied to canvas doesn't mean in the same way. That's pretty outrageous. So Max first, then Molly, then Emily, and then we're going to go around and get final words. So Chris won't take any more calls tonight. Max, your thought, if any?
Yeah, it is astonishing when you think about it, or when you try and think about it, because it's a very hard thing to think about.
It is.
I think a way for me to think about it, as I was pondering this earlier this week as I'm preparing for a Stein themed meetup this weekend.
Oh, good. When is it?
Saturday. I was going to plug it in my final words, so
okay.
I'll
All right.
bracket that and continue
Okay.
this. I think one helpful way to kind of get up into these sort of rarefied intellectual stratospheres that sometimes you have to get up into in order to really appreciate things like this is to just think about her resistance to grammar
Yeah.
and what that's doing. And then like really trying to follow her and let go of your need to reimpose grammar on her work, which is a reflex I think a lot of us have, and one that I've had to fight in myself. And then you can start to appreciate this, I guess we were talking about materiality earlier. You can start to appreciate again the materiality of the language, and how it can invoke, how it can be evocative without having a semantic meaning.
Great. And I think a key phrase that you used in that comment was "let go." Right? We have to let go of a bunch of things, and Stein helps us do that. And so many of the poets that we're studying do that. Thank
It's
you.
hard.
Yeah, it is hard. Molly, any thought on this?
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I'm glad Max said that. There's something that almost feels a little bit dehumanizing to me about taking away to make meaning, or asking the reader not to try to make meaning, and
Right.
to that really basic block of when there's also something that is really primitive about it. You know, it's like petroglyphs. Stein is drawing pictures with her words.
Yeah.
And maybe that enables us to create a fuller, not meaning exactly, but a fuller identification with it in some way.
Yeah. I mean, primitive is such a loaded word, so I think we should find synonyms for it. You know, back to basics, back to what human beings used to use for noise. I mean, this is the kids on the train. They didn't really mean anything about God when they said it. They were just, as far as I know, oh my God. So, yes. Who's Emily?
Hey,
Thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think, having encountered this idea over the years, the way I'm thinking about it now is in understanding language or writing as an analog for painting. Maybe what that means for me now is starting to see language not as just something we apply to what we've already seen, but a new way of seeing, of looking at the world, which is what painting does. So, not just a way of kind of codifying a representation we've already decided upon, but actually opening ourselves up to new experiences for representation.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much. All right, we're gonna go around. Just final thoughts. Final words on Stein. Final words on anything that's been said today. If you have something you want to say that you came today to say and didn't have a chance. So we're gonna start with Anna, and then we'll just go around and we'll ask, and we'll use that portable mic for some people out there.
Yeah.
Anna, final thoughts?
Oh my God, this conversation's been so great. I hope that for anyone who's out there listening who's maybe had some trouble with Stein this week, that what's been said here, especially by Emily just now, about how language is not about telling us what we've already seen, but asking us to see differently, is maybe something of an avenue into this really difficult work. But I would also say that if you're having trouble with Stein, take a break. That's okay. And go hang out with the Baroness instead. We didn't talk about the Baroness.
We should have, when Aaron talked
know.
about neurodifference, and we should have talked about the Baroness, because I don't know that she was diagnosed. I doubt it, right? But there was mental ill health, as we would put it. But what she wrote, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of poems, most of them unpublished, most of them still in the archive at Maryland, and most of it kind of pigeony bilingual, is astonishing. It's astonishing. A Dozen Cocktails, Please is like one of the more coherent poems. And yet, even the cool people have not gotten to the Baroness yet. Because there's how many Baronesses are out there is the question. In literary history, how many Baronesses have been so completely lost because of our notion of what constitutes the canon, or our notion of what's crazy and why we wouldn't want a crazy person in the canon? And we can all think of them, and they're just worth trying to recover. I think literary historians should be doing it. Yeah, maybe you want to go next, Karis, on final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm keen to do that.
Okay.
I'm going to take us in a bit of a circle here, and I'm going to start with a thought on a long dress. I'm going to start by actually reading a line, which is, what is the current that makes the machinery that makes it crackle? What is the current that presents a long line? And I love that, the emphasis on making, right? Making and current are the two words I kind of want to focus on there. When we talk about making, we have to talk about labor, which brings us to what Emily was saying about labor. But then the current, what is the current? Is the current the social energy? And I want to think about how that brings us back to the salon and the conversation and the labor and the salon behind the poems and the labor that goes on in that conversation. And also not just the conversing, but the listening. And so I think Stein invites us to go back to other modes, the creative critical conversation, and ask, what is the labor of listening? How do we talk about the labor of listening? How do we talk about the conversation as a critical mode and the labor that goes on? And we find women. I think we find women. We find other marginalized voices in those conversations. The baronesses, and I think shifting focus. I think there's a lot of merit in it, and maybe Deanna can pick up on that.
Yeah. Wow. Snaps for Karis Shearer. That was so great. I'm glad we recorded that.
The making
thank
and
you.
the current.
You really put it all together. That was great. Deanna, do you have the mic, or do you have access to the mic? You want to do a final word? I know you don't, but it's got to go green. Chris can do his magic, I think.
Hey, is it working now? Yeah, I think, that's something that Karis and I are really, really interested in, is the sociality around literature, which is something that really happens in an auditory mode. Like, it happens in conversation, it happens in these sort of face-to-face encounters. And it's always amazing to me when literature itself becomes, the printed word itself becomes a reflection of that labor. Because I think that's not always the case. In a lot of cases, there's a sort of feeling that one has to hide the labor behind the production of literature, but it's nice when it's sort of visible and can be worked through in the poems themselves, and then also in considering the history around the poems as well. And I just want to, as a last word, say what an absolute pleasure it was to listen to that Stein recording. And it's really nice to be reminded of, why we do this, and that there's just so much pleasure to be derived in listening and being an auditor to these things.
Well said. Jason, since the mic is near you, do you want to get a final word?
There's so many things that I learned today that I'd like to have a final word on, or attempt to say something about. But I want to come back to something Max said about sort of the taking away of semantic meaning, and sort of link it to things that were said around materiality of language and about narrative and closure, and sort of add just to the mix in relation to that recording, how, and sort of going back to what I was saying earlier, how important intonation is, right, as a factor in actually producing semantic meaning. So that I think one of the things that's amazing about that recording that we were listening to is that that Gertrude Stein in the delivery of that piece is really challenging, not only grammatically, closure, but also intonationally. That we use intonation to make things mean, right? And just the way I'm talking now, if you saw a visualization of it, it would be all kinds of little pitch contours moving all over the place, which are sort of signs of my effort to make you understand what I'm saying. And I think in that Gertrude Stein recording, she's partly experimenting with ways to speak so that we're not beholden to speaking with meaning in the way we normally think about it, you know.
Damn, everybody's so hot tonight. That was so great. I wonder if, I'm going to ask Max to do a final word next, but I wonder if Yuval would be willing to do a final word. Yeah, so we're going to get the mic to Yuval while Max is doing a final word. And Max, I'm setting you up. What Deanna and Jason just said reminded me of the epigraph to this poem that we talked about earlier today, the Laura Broadbent poem. It's the epigraph comes from Senecera, and it says, "I am not interested in other words for honey. I am interested in honey." And honey is a great choice there, because the pleasure that you described from being an auditor that Deanna did, that's the honey somehow, right? That's the word as a sound, as a material thing, or the word as a pigment applied to a canvas is the honey. I'm not interested in words about honey. I want the honey. And poems can give us honey. We just have to situate ourselves in relation to them, and we will get so much honey. And it'll be so good. And I'm not going to go any further about honey because it'll get me too honeyed up. But Max, I was going to go to Max and then Yuval. Max, final thought? You can plug your meetup.
My final thought is going to be a plug for the meetup in Chicago this coming weekend. We will be meeting Saturday, October 6th at 11 a.m. That's Central Time, of course, at the Harold Washington Library, which is in the Loop. I'm sure if you're from the Chicago area, you know where that is. We'll be meeting in the 5th floor north wing, one of their meeting rooms. I'll be at the top of the escalators for a little while to kind of gather people together before we head over there. If you come late, just come find us. The rooms they have big windows so you can see inside.
Great. Do you know what poem you're going to talk about?
Yes, we're going to do one of the stanzas in meditation.
Really?
Yeah.
Are you going to film
I
it?
just like to find something that we haven't done already on the syllabus.
Wow. Are you going to film it?
Yes, I will film it.
Great. That's great, Max. Let us know which of the stanzas in meditation you choose.
It's the second one.
Okay.
I needed to look at it real quick to be reminded.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Max. Thanks for doing that. So we're going to go to Yuval for a final thought, and then we'll go to Molly. Yuval, hi.
Hi. So, I mean, several people were mentioning, sound and the materiality of the words, and referencing it specifically as music, as a student of composition, I'll say, that I find rather than grammatical sense, I guess, I still find a lot of composition in the structure of the words.
Yes.
So I'll just give one line, and as kind of a priming for it, I'll say that what I find extremely musical in the repetition is that after that sort of, for lack of a better word right now, some kind of sensory deprivation.
Yes.
As soon as a new word comes, there's some neurons fire up because they've been waiting for something.
Cool.
But then the words she introduces are still meaningless. So I'll just read this line. And
Okay,
then
please.
Hopefully you'll hear what I hear.
Okay.
On a kind of mundane word at the end of this thing. So, shutters shut and open, so do queens. Shutters shut and shutters, and so shutters shut and shutters, and so shutters. And so shutters shut, and so shutters shut, and shutters, and so shutters shut, and so and also. And also, and so, and so, and also.
Yeah.
Now, I try to not emphasize also too much, but I still feel like it jumps out at you as like, there's a new word.
Yeah.
But then she kind of uses that on a very mundane also. Also what? Like it still doesn't go to meaning. It's just the sonic thrill of the new word.
Fantastic. Snaps for Yuval. That's great. Are you Montreal? You're here?
I just started here, yeah. Started my PhD in music technology here at
Music
McGill.
technology. Fantastic. And are you at Concordia?
No, McGill. Just
McGill. Great.
Down the street, really.
Fantastic. Okay, so we're going to go to Molly, and then Magdalena, and then there's just a couple more. I can't get to everybody on the final words, but Magdalena, all the way from Poland, you deserve a final word. How are you? This is your second or third year in ModPo?
This is my second year
Yeah.
in ModPo. And I'm thinking that we're doing the same poems and we're adding new ones, and it's actually wonderful that we're doing the same poems. And this morning I was talking to my grandma, and she was telling me anecdotes, and she had told me some of the same anecdotes last night, and I enjoyed it as much. So when we tell stories, when we tell poems, we keep on saying and we keep on reading the same ones, but each time it's different, and each time we can get as much pleasure from it. So repetition has a certain magic to it.
Beautifully said. Fantastic. You're in Warsaw, right?
Yes, I'm based in Warsaw, but I'm my part of my heart. I left in Montreal because I have my family here, and as you can see, they support me in my crazy passions. So.
Uncle, thank you for coming tonight. My family was all Warsaw, so someday I've never been. Someday I will go.
Oh, you have to come.
You'll guide me.
I will guide you personally.
Okay. It's not the right moment for me to say all the heebie-jeebies I feel about Warsaw, but I'm going to make it back. I'm going to see.
Do you know when I learned that you have like links to Poland, I was thinking like this cannot be a coincidence.
Oh, that's great. No, that's great. Thank you. I think we want to go to Molly for a final word, and then Emily, then Aaron, and then me. Molly?
Hi, and I have to run right after this.
Okay.
But I'm thinking about labor, and I'm thinking politics. And last week at our SoCal meetup, we read Tracy Morris's Enclosed,
Which is a response to Stein. Yeah.
A response to Stein in the style of Stein, mostly. And I never thought I'd say this, but it made me think that Stein is not political enough, although for her time, I understand that what she was doing was really radical. It was nice to get a epic response to that. And we did make a video, and I just sent it over to you guys. It took a couple days, I'm sorry. And then we have another SoCal meetup coming up on October 21st. So details about that are in the study groups forum.
Great. Thank you, Molly. Thanks for joining us tonight. And Emily Harnett, final thought?
Sure. I'm still thinking about our conversation about plot earlier, which is something I'm always thinking about because I love plot, but I also teach poetry. And one of the coolest books I ever read suggested that our craving for narrative and plot is essentially apocalyptic. We love plots because, not so much because they have beginnings and middles, but because they have ends, right? It's really the ending which secures the symmetry of the whole and gives us a sense of plot. There's a consolation in that, and knowing that maybe our experience, maybe all experience culminates in some type of grand conclusion after which we expect meaning to be revealed and certified. And Al, you also mentioned William James earlier, who I've been reading a lot of, kind of fascinating, weird, humane psychologist and philosopher, who in his biography suggested that for him it was certainty that was a kind of moral death, and still is very apropos to our course. And if that's what plots do, is they end and provide certainty, then maybe what we're always trying to avoid in avoiding plot is the kind of moral failure that certainty creates sometimes. And maybe that's a kind of handy description for what poetry is trying to do in general. Kind of moved by that idea.
We're kind of moved by all your ideas. That was great. Ann and I are looking at each other thinking, Emily's doing it again. That's great. Thank you, Emily. Thanks for joining us. Join us again. I know that we're doing daytime webcasts, which is hard for you as a teacher, but next time there's an evening one. Or maybe you can just tell the bosses, since all those bosses know me at that school.
That they do.
They do. Tell them you have to leave for 90 minutes sometime.
Bye, kids. Sorry.
Okay. Anyway, I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway.
Are you for real?
All right, just say it's the poetry doctor. Yeah, that'll go over. Who knows? Aaron Moray, thank you for joining us tonight. Do you have a final thought?
Oh, I mean, I think that it's already been said, really, all of my thoughts. But just simply that it's not about, when you look at poems like Stein's, that it's not about not making meaning, but about not fixing meaning. The world is full of meanings. They're contrasting. They're incomplete. They hurtle against each other. They're like flying atoms. So, but not about fixing meaning which is a process that can sometimes exclude all these other things, like always wanting to remove the extraneous things when perhaps they might be the way to go.
Well said. Thank you. I have two final comments, and then we're going to thank everybody and wrap up. First of all, I want to shout out to Benita Cape. Benita and I have been correspondents for a couple of years. She is a ModPoer, and she lives in what she claims, and of course the world is round, so this is a funny claim, but she lives in the easterlymost city in the world, which is to say she lives in a little eastern spot. Zach, I don't know if this is... There's New Zealand, and that's where Benita is. That's pretty far east, and there's a whole lot of ocean after that. Right. So anyway, Benita is, she has been the last couple of years taking care of her husband, who has been afflicted by something very degenerative and very difficult. And she came to ModPo at the point where she was, just taking a lot of care of him. The town is called Gisborne, by the way, or Gisborne. Anyway, she has written about this, and she's become a poet. So if you look up Benita Cape on the web, you'll find her. She's had a recent piece published in a magazine that's subtitled as Conversations About Medicine and Life, and her piece is called "And Then, a Story of Caregiving and Poetry." And basically, you'll find when you look at this that Benita has decided to take care of Pat in parallel to her writing poems about the taking care and caregiving, and it's quite remarkable what she's done. And she's involved in ModPo right there with Pat. She's involved in ModPo because ModPo is giving her a community that she doesn't really have, a poetry community in that little town. And I'll just read you. She put some tankas together to create a sequence of tankas. I'll just read you. It's called Like Skin. Like Skin. Talking to the therapist of a need for the hospital bed, his eyes and mine fill with tears. Advances in medicine, hardly any difference in the pressure patch. And your beautiful skin, discarding yet another pressure patch. I also toss a film of shit, early morning poems to beds, tears and shit. He prefers me to prep and place the pressure patch. I despair of my skills. And the despairing there is, of course, her skills as a caregiver, because it just gets harder and harder. But it's ironic because her skills as a poet, it's ironic. She should not despair of her skills, and I think she knows that she shouldn't despair of her skills because she is a skilled poet evermore as she takes care of Pat. So a shout out to Benita. You're one of us, Benita, and it's a long way from Gisborne to Philadelphia, but you're welcome anytime. And then finally, some ModPo person said, I got to tell you about a quote from Adrienne Rich. Now, I met Adrienne Rich. She was at the Writer's House for a couple days. Fantastic. It's not a poet I return to as much as I should. But this, and I finally looked at the quote that was sent to me, and it just makes me think something Aaron said earlier about, before TV and the salon and the importance of conversation, but also the politics in the U.S. at the moment. I just want to end by quoting this. Adrienne Rich. The decline in adult literacy means not merely a decline in the capacity to read and write, but a decline in the impulse to puzzle out, brood upon, argue about, turn inside out in verbal euphoria, the incomparable medium of language. And boy, is she so right. Thank you, Jason and Deanna, for helping us set up here. Thank you, and snaps for Chris and Zach, who brought all this equipment from Philly and made this work. It is a hard thing to do. Believe me, it is not easy. Karis, thank you so much for coming all the way across the country.
Thanks, Al.
You are at the campus of the University of British Columbia at Okanagan.
That's right.
In a town called Kelowna, which I only know because we share a social medium with for exercise, and I get to see maps of your runs and your biking and swimming too.
And swimming too. Sometimes. I don't love swimming.
It's amazing. Kelowna. I'd like to get there someday.
You should come visit.
It's, I imagine, beautiful. Right.
It's stunning. Yeah.
Magdalena, all the way from Poland. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Aaron, thank you again. Anna, you're the best. Made this trip. Augusto, you're here. You're going back home at some point? Well, we're glad you're here. I'm glad you came. Patricia, Yuval, Kyle, Beth, Allison, Colleen, Ray from DC for calling, Allison from Sacramento. I didn't mean all those nasty things I said about Sacramento. Abdul from the Netherlands, really great to hear your voice, and Nancy Landy from Montana, and everybody else. Molly and Max and Emily. I'm sure I forgot some people. Thank you all for coming. Colleen Knight, the famous, thank you for all the work that you do, and Allison. And we'll see you next week from Philadelphia. So have a good week. Bye.